Welcome to College Bound Success, College to Career. This is the podcast for college curious and college bound students and families. Together, we'll navigate the journey from high school to higher education and beyond. I'm Mark Mastalski, an independent college success consultant, and I'm here to share strategies, insights, and stories to help you make confident choices about college, careers, and your future. So let's get started. Today, I'm really excited to be joined by Ann Garcia. Ann is a CFP, a Certified Financial Planner, in Oregon, and I'm super excited. And I know you and I just recently connected, and I'm excited to talk with you because I think you have so much to share and we'll get into this about your personal story and everything. But thanks for joining me today. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, awesome. So, the first thing I just always like to do is I'd like to do just a little bit of your history and background because, I do call this college to career, and I think it's always great for people to hear other people's journeys about how they got to where they are. So, first of all, can you just introduce yourself? Who are you and what should people know about you and what you do?
Yeah, I'm Ann Garcia. I'm a certified financial planner and wealth advisor at the Mather Group. One of the areas of focus for me as an advisor is families who are planning for college. And I kind of stumbled into that because I recognized that a lot of people were asking questions about it and advisors weren't giving very good answers. I'm also a mom of two who recently graduated debt-free from their first choice colleges. So I feel like I get to say my system works.
Yeah, I bet a lot of people just heard that and their ears went up when they heard debt free. So that's congrats to you and to your kids. I know they're twins, and you have talked a little bit about that in your book today, which we'll make sure we talk about. So can you first talk about like what was your path to college? Where did you grow up, and what do you remember was college just like, well, yeah, of course you're going to college, or is it something that you more sought out? What was that journey like for you?
So I grew up in California in the Bay Area and I think college was always just sort of an expectation in my family. Both I'm far from first generation college. My parents were both college graduates. And we went to school in a school district where it was expected that we would go to college. In fact, it's kind of funny. When I graduated, I decided to take a gap year. And I got called to the principal's office because I was like the only person in my graduating class who wasn't going straight to college. And they thought that that looked
Really?
bad. So that's a small but meaningful generation gap. Gap years used to be looked on a little bit differently than they are now.
Right.
But, when I was growing up in California, schools were very focused on tracking people into the California universities, whether it's the UCs, Cal States, or community colleges. I went to Berkeley, studied history, planned to become a professor, and then my parents insisted that I not go straight to grad school. So I took some time off, stumbled into a great career, had a lot of fun. I worked in tech for quite a while.
Mm.
Then I had kids, and I realized after having kids that I didn't want to go back to tech. I
Yeah.
started looking around for what my next step would be. And one of my longest stints in the tech industry was working for Intuit, which makes Quicken and TurboTax and all kinds of other things by now, but those were the big ones when I was there. And we used to always say it Intuit every January 15th, all your friends call and ask for a free copy of TurboTax, and every April 15th they call and ask what to do with their tax refund. And I realized I had really enjoyed having those conversations, thinking strategically about the role that money plays in your life and how you can direct it towards the things that are important to you, your budget being a statement of values, so to speak. And so
Mhm.
I decided I would um, go back to school, get my CFP, and become an advisor. And then, as I was saying, I realized early on that a lot of people were asking about college and weren't getting good answers.
Right. And that those questions have not gone away. I'm sure you continue to hear them all the time. Another reason I appreciate being able to connect with you and talk about this is, and I'm not trying to, I'm not a CFP, but I also got into money using YNAB, if you're familiar with You
Mhm.
Need a Budget, years ago. And I have just found like the ability, in your book, and I will highlight it here. Anne has written a tremendous book. It's called How to Pay for College, a complete financial plan for funding your child's education. And one of the things that you is so clear throughout your book is you do view yourself as an educator. You want people to understand the mechanics, the strategies, and the whys for why they're making these decisions. And that was something that, I also came across like, what is it you want your money to do for you? We all work, we all earn money, but what's the why behind it? And so I really reading your book, the way you connect, the why, not just, but why going to college, why behind how you're coming up with a savings plan and strategy and everything. So that's really interesting. So from history, thinking about being a professor, all the way. And isn't that wonderful, right? That's life, right? The changes. My background is mechanical engineering. And now I'm doing the educational consultant thing. So that's
And I think that's one of the things that we make it really difficult for kids when we give them this, give them this idea that they have to know as 17 and 18-year-olds what they want to do with the rest of their lives, when a huge percentage of us did things that are completely different. And whether we changed in college, after college, at some point mid-career, or whatever else, the main thing that's important that you do as a young person is keep doors open for yourself.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And unfortunately, building on what you said, some schools out there don't make that easy for a 17 or 18-year-old because you have to actually apply into a specific program, right? You're not just
Mhm.
applying to the school. You have to be able to say, and I want to be in this program. And that's a lot of pressure on a
Yeah.
17 18-year-old kind of traditional aged college student. So well, thanks for that. I think it's always interesting to see where people have come from to what they're doing now. So let's jump in now to so you are also known, you have a website that is the College Financial Lady. So what's the origin story of that? Can you take us through that?
Well, I found as I was talking to people about college stuff that I was answering the same questions a lot, again and again and again. And so I started writing the answers down just so, when I did the follow-up email from the meeting, I wasn't rewriting the same stuff constantly. And one year, it's a long time ago now, I made a New Year's resolution that I was going to start writing more. And so I decided I was going to write a blog. And since I had all these emails that I was sending to people about different college planning topics, I said, I think I'll try writing about this topic. And it was something that I really was just doing for myself, just to sort of generate that, to create that kind of discipline. And a couple months into it, it got picked up by the New York Times and linked to in an online article about planning for college. And so suddenly I had an audience, and then I
Yeah.
sort of had all these people I needed to keep writing for. And so here we are all these years later.
It's amazing what kind of motivation and inspiration that is, right? When these people start following you and everything. So it kind of happened organically. And
Mhm.
could you speak to, was there a moment like with a specific client or anything that you just kind of said to yourself, Wow. There's a lot of, misinformation, or the way people are thinking about this is just not the way that they should be thinking about that. Like, was there any moment like that in the work that you've done with families?
I think the one that really has stuck with me is a few years ago, I met a woman who was an attorney and was wanting to make a career change. And she had borrowed so much money. She had maxed out the federal loans. She had taken out private loans. She had borrowed from family members. She had financed her entire undergraduate and law degrees
Mm,
through borrowing. And all she wanted was to do something other than be an attorney, and
yeah,
it just wasn't possible for her.
it
And I thought,
wasn't
wait a
going to
minute, the
work.
whole point of education is to open doors and to create a future where more is possible. And in her case, her education had, you know, slammed the door shut, locked it, and thrown away the key, and then probably nailed a couple boards on top of it just to make sure she couldn't get out. And
Hmm.
it really made me realize that there's a limited number of people who are going to come through my door and work with me as clients, and there's an unlimited number of people who need the information that I provide to those people. And so that's why I've always made a point of having content that's very publicly available on my website, in my book and places like that, so that people do have access to good advice for making good decisions about college.
Yeah. So in other words, she did what everybody thinks, like go and get highly educated.
Hmm.
And you said she was a lawyer, so she would have had her JD. But because of the sheer amount of debt that she took on, she was actually pigeonholed,
Yep.
that she just couldn't make
There was
make changes.
yeah, there was no way out from under it. And there were probably lots of other ways for her to get that education
Hmm.
at lower cost, and where she would have had the flexibility to do other things with her life rather than being on the partner track at a law firm.
Right, right. One of the things that jumps out at me, so my wife, both she and I both have, years of higher ed experience. And she was in financial aid for a while. And she would come home and tell me stories all the time of families who were literally in her office the day before school starts. Like school starts on Tuesday, and they're in her office on a Monday, and they're looking at her saying, "How do we pay the bill?"
Mhm.
And they just moved their kid, right, their student, into the residence hall, and now they're sitting in front of the financial aid person saying, what do we do? So this is the reason, again, I'm so glad that we can talk, and I hope we can get more information out to folks. And certainly I invite listeners, please, go to seek out your resources, your website, your book, How to Pay for College. um, so I'm one of these, sometimes I just jump to the end of a book. In the end, your last kind of you know thing you want to share with families is basically you're saying a good college plan is like equal parts good parenting and good financial planning. What do you mean by that? What is the balance there?
Well, what I mean is, you can have the greatest plan in the world, but if your kid doesn't know about it, it really doesn't matter, because
Mm,
you're not making this plan for yourself, you're making this plan for them. And so, as parents of college-bound kids, we need to be transparent with our kids about what we expect from them, what we're willing to contribute, what we're able to contribute, what we expect them to contribute to the process, so that they don't get ahead of us in finding colleges that are unaffordable. Because if they're not hearing about it from you, they're hearing about it
mhm.
from their friends, and they're hearing about it from their
Right.
friends' older siblings, and they're hearing about it from their own older siblings, and they're hearing about it from teachers and college and career center at school. So they're getting lots and lots of information about college. Our job as parents is to get in front of that information, because kids have so many choices. There are good college choices at literally every price point. But
Mhm.
when our kids don't know what price point they're shopping in, they're going to go out and make their own decisions. And I think in particular, when you're talking about high school kids, maybe they've had a minimum wage job, maybe they've done babysitting or yard work or something like that. The dollars involved in college are not not numbers they can comprehend. The impact of student loans, not numbers they can comprehend. They see
Yeah.
things like a college graduate makes on average $70,000 a year when they come out of school, and they think, well, that would
Mhm.
be no problem if I had $100,000 of debt because it would take me 2 years to pay it off.
Right. And that
And
math
that's
isn't
actually not
mathing,
true.
right? Yeah. Yeah. That's I think that's so true. And one of the things I have something I do with my clients to put the money in perspective is, if they're working, we'll talk about, okay, how much do you make an hour? And then what I usually do is I even like, let's even increase that. I just gave you a raise. And then we do the math. We're like, okay, what's your take home with that? How much are you bringing home? Now, let's say you have X amount in debt. How do you cover this? Because yeah, to your point, it's just we're kind of asking young people and young adults to kind of think about something that they haven't yet really been taught to think about.
Yep.
So yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think how you do the parenting part is also really important. I think talking about it from the perspective of goals as opposed to limits is a really
mhm.
important piece of that. So it's important to us that you go to college. We've been saving diligently. We would like you to be able to graduate debt free. We know we have enough money that you could do that at our in-state schools. And you can probably find other options within that same budget, and we'll support you in finding them, is a lot
Yeah.
more empowering to your kid than you can only go in state.
Yeah, I think that's so well said. I think the positive framing, like whatever you have, I think framing it as, we are so excited that we are able to offer you, provide you with X, whatever the number is, as opposed to we're so sorry that we can't pay for that school or whatever it is. So I think that positive framing is so important. Um, families, I think sometimes feel like college costs sneak up on them, right? High school goes fast, and sometimes it's junior year, and what a lot of families may not know is like junior year is already go time. Like, oh my
Mhm.
gosh, in this kind of the college journey has kind of accelerated. So with your lens as a CFP, when do you think is the right time for them to start thinking about a college financial plan?
I would say it's never too early, but then it's also never too late. There's always
Mhm.
something you can be doing. And the power of compounding is one of those magical wonders where the earlier you start to save, the more work your money does because it's got more time to be invested and to grow. The longer you wait, the more work you do. If you start depositing $25 a month when your kid is born, you'll have probably the same amount of money as if you started depositing $2,000 a month when they hit high school.
Right.
I mean, that's maybe somewhat exaggerated. I'm not doing compound math well in my
Yeah.
head, but
It's close. It's close. The idea is solid.
so the sooner you start with the savings program, the more choices your child is going to have when the time comes for college, because ultimately, from a financial side, their choices are driven to some degree by how much money is available. Savings is the one part that you can be working on all along to build up. So never too early. On the other hand, if you are the parent of a high school student and this is the first time you've looked at it, you're not too late. But here's where the parenting piece of it becomes really important because chances are you're not going to be able to come up with the money for a full price private school. So that means your student is going to be looking for places that offer scholarships. whether they're eligible for merit scholarships or need-based scholarships. That's needs to be part of their search process. The good news is, much as we let the Harvards and Stanfords of the world drive so much of the conversation around college and college outcomes, good college experiences are available from a lot of places. And in fact, there was a study done a few years ago that surveyed people who were successful as adults to figure out what about their college experience led to that success. And it's called the
Hmm.
Gallup-Purdue Index. But they found there were 6 factors that determined success as an adult. And those were things like feeling like professors cared about you, having opportunities to apply classroom learning in a real world environment, participating in extracurriculars, working on a project that took a semester or longer to complete. And you know what? Lots and lots of colleges offer those. You
Right.
can have those experiences a lot of places, and those are the things that drive engagement, that drive long-term, that drive long-term success far more than the name of the school that's on your diploma.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely well said. I think there's there's where awareness that's going on these days, and people are starting to maybe set aside some of the um, like rankings documents and so forth, and kind of find like what makes sense, fit. And part of that is, again, based on our conversation today, I think people are seeing, that this fall, there's 16 schools that have already published a cost of attendance over $100,000. And
Mhm.
families, some families, right? The world is full of lots of different people. Some families will look at it and be like, so what? We have it. We have the means. We have the opportunity. Not a big deal. But a lot of people are going to look at it and go, that's crazy.
Mhm.
There's no way. That's not even in the same stratosphere of what we have available to us. So there's a
Yeah.
lot
Well, and
of
I think there's 2 important elements about that. One is the majority of people do not pay $100,000 a year for college,
right.
even people on those campuses. But
Yeah.
the other piece of it is there's absolutely zero pressure on those schools to lower their prices because every year they turn away tens of thousands of people who are willing to pay that full price. And that's what makes the system so messy, right?
Hmm.
We'll keep raising our prices because people will pay that, but then we got to discount the price so that we can fill up the classroom.
Right.
And
Right.
and that's where our system gets, just messy and convoluted. It drives away students who shouldn't be driven away because those same schools tend to be the ones that are most generous to students who have
Right.
high financial need, but families see $100,000 and walk away.
Right. Right. Yeah. No, it's absolutely because they tend to have the most financial means to help families. But yeah, that initial just cost in their face. Like, why would we even try? So,
Yeah. I know
um,
for my kids, my daughter went to a private school, and the most expensive school she applied to was the one that she had the lowest cost of attendance. And
mhm,
partly that's because the more selective schools want to make sure that if they admit you, you say yes.
right. They want that high yield rate.
Hmm.
Yep. If they're admitting you, they want you to
That's
come.
that's how they
So,
stay selective.
yeah. So in one of your chapters, in fact, wow, I just opened to it. Chapter 4. You discuss two well-known forms that the FAFSA and the CSS profile. So what are these forms? What are the key differences between them? Why do we have the two of them?
Why do we have the two of them? So the FAFSA is the federal financial aid form. It's the official name of it is the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. The FAFSA is used by 100% of colleges because that's the application for all of the federal student aid programs. So that's Pell Grants, it's work study, it's also federal student loans, which are, many of which are not allocated on the basis of need. So just it's a loan application for a lot of families. The CSS profile is a similar form, but it's used by a subset of primarily private colleges to award their own institutional aid. Now, many colleges use the FAFSA to award their own aid in addition to federal aid. And then the CSS profile, like I said, is just used by a smaller group of colleges.
Right.
One way to look at it is the FAFSA is like an X-ray of your finances. The CSS profile is like a colonoscopy of your finances, but it's really a
I like
snapshot in
that. It
time
is more invasive.
and is far more invasive. Um, the really important piece of it, and I think families misunderstand this because I see so many families spend a whole bunch of time strategizing on the FAFSA, then they get a low student aid index, but then they go and apply to colleges that don't meet financial need. So the FAFSA is not the tooth fairy. The CSS profile is not the tooth fairy. These are tools that colleges use to evaluate all students' ability to pay on a consistent set of metrics. The really important thing with both of those forms, well, two really important things. One is you file them, file the FAFSA regardless of where you're going, file the CSS profile if any of your schools require it. Um, but the really important thing is what do the colleges actually do with that information? Do they
Mm.
meet 100% of your financial need? If so, do they meet it through grants and scholarships, or do they include loans and work study in your package? Because that's where you really save a lot of money on college is by finding schools that will give you the scholarships that you're eligible for. Now,
Yeah.
a lot of families say, well, my income's too high, I'm never going to qualify for financial aid. Many of the most selective private schools give full tuition scholarships to students from families whose parents earn $250,000 a year or less. So
Nice.
that's like the top 5%, is the only groups that are excluded. If you have multiple children, then even at higher incomes than that, it's likely that you'll be eligible for aid. There is no downside risk to filing the FAFSA. um, um, the risk of not filing it is that you won't be considered for any kind of financial aid. Now, not all schools meet financial need, not all schools offer financial aid, but every school offers some kind of scholarship. And so there's this other big pool of scholarships that have nothing to do with need, which are called merit scholarships. And those are tuition discounts that colleges offer to enroll the students that they want to enroll. So lots of families will get financial aid on the basis of need, and lots of families will get scholarships on the basis of merit. Not all colleges offer both. Some offer one or the other, but every college offers some form of scholarships. And so, what's really important as part of your college planning journey is that you figure out what scholarships you're eligible for and apply to colleges that offer them. So, if you are not eligible for need-based aid, apply to schools that offer merit scholarships. If you do have high financial need, apply to colleges that meet your financial need.
Yeah, yeah. And if people are wondering, I actually have done some of my writing about this on my blog. There's really great information you can find in the common data sets of all the
Mhm.
schools that actually highlights what their average like scholarship is and the percentage of meeting financial need. So there's all kinds of information that's actually very public, but
Yeah.
a lot of families don't know necessarily that information is out there.
Yeah,
So
if you know where to look, there's tons of data. And so, as you were saying, Common Data Set is a voluntary reporting tool that colleges fill out. Section H of it is what shows financial aid. It shows what types of scholarships are given and the average amount. You can Google the college name and Common Data Set,
got it.
but a shortcut is the website collegedata.com, where they aggregate
Mhm.
common data set data. And you can look up a college in there, click on the financials tab, and it shows you, what financial aid forms do they use, what percent of need is met for students with need, and what's the average size of merit scholarship for a student who didn't have financial need. And it's fascinating. I mean, there are schools that give scholarships to 99% of students.
Right.
And at that point, you're like, why bother? Is the 1%, the
Hmm.
1% who pay full price really, really worth all this chicanery and the number of applicants that you probably drive away because of the cost?
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. Actually, I'm really, you are very kind of direct in your book. You advocate that all families, should complete the FAFSA. And I will say I've had clients that have actually, pushed against that and just said it's a waste of time. We're not going to do it. Our students not going to get any financial aid. But I think to your point, I think it's really important. Sometimes, they will miss out because the school is expecting to see that data um, in order to award potential scholarships for
Yeah.
the student.
And I would say a couple things. One is some merit scholarships require you to file the FAFSA to be eligible for it. So you're
Yeah, it's
potentially
true.
ruling yourself out of some non-need-based scholarships when you don't file the FAFSA. Um, I also think there's a parenting element of it in there, which is to say you may have some requirements for your kids that are the conditions of your supporting their education. If they don't meet those requirements, you probably don't want to fully rip the rug out from under them. You do want them to graduate because having a college degree provides tremendous benefits over the course of your adulthood, not just financial, but also social, psychological, um, and health benefits. So you do want your kid to get to that finish line. You don't want to pull the rug out from them completely, but you might say, well, you know what, you're going to be taking out the student loan every year. Um, but
Yeah.
another thing is that something like half of families expect they're going to borrow for college, and two-thirds of students end up with student loan debt. So that tells me that people are not anticipating the full cost of college. And your best borrowing source is the federal direct student loan. And so if you don't file the FAFSA, you don't have access to that money.
Right. Right. Yeah. Um, So in your book, one of the things I did appreciate is at the end of every single chapter, you have worksheets available for people. So you basically are helping take the little elements of education that you have in each chapter and put it into an action item kind of worksheet. With that being said, how can you walk us through high level, what is building a college list with finances in mind, right? What does that look like?
So the most important thing to do is use the tools that are out there and available to you. So when your student indicates an interest in a college, step one is to do their net price calculator. Every college is required to have a net price calculator. You punch in your data and it tells you what students like you currently pay to attend that school. It's not an offer of aid. I will say for my daughter in the admissions process, every college she was accepted to, the package was within $2,000 of what the net price calculator had
Yeah,
said. So that'll give you a really good sense of what your actual cost to attend those schools will be. Then the parallel exercise you need to do is figure out what you can actually afford to pay. And there's a couple components to that. One is how much savings do you have? And I always recommend you take your savings and you divide it by four, because typically you want to spend your savings down over 4 years. And then how much can you come up with out of pocket? So most families finance through a combination of savings and paying out of pocket, maybe some borrowing. What skin in the game do you want your student to have? Do you want to make them responsible for certain costs? Do you want to make them responsible for some percentage of the cost? Um, do you have a fixed amount you can contribute and they're responsible for everything on top of that? So you can add up all those pieces and come up with a number that is, this is what we can pay for you to go to college every year. Once you start doing those net price calculators, you can see, are the schools you're interested in actually going to fit in your budget? And and if the answer is no, you have a couple of options. One is, what is it that you like about that school? And let's find some others that have those similar characteristics
great
that
suggestion.
might
Yeah.
admit you at a lower cost. And another is look for the other type of scholarship, which is outside scholarships. So outside scholarships are scholarships that are offered by someone other than the college. Now, these are usually good for closing small gaps, not necessarily the difference between a $10,000 a year budget and a $100,000 a year college.
Right, right.
Um, but they can definitely, they can definitely help to fill gaps there. And
Yeah,
so, by
absolutely.
comparing those two, there's oftentimes schools that you can rule out, and other schools that become much more interesting. The other thing that we always did with all the colleges was we'd do the net price calculator, and then we'd go to the scholarships page and see were there other scholarships there that my daughter might be eligible for, and we could incorporate them in. So one of the schools she was interested in, the net price calculator was too high. There was another scholarship that would bring it down within there, and so on our research spreadsheet, which is one of the sheets in the book, we had a note that if you got this scholarship, you could go there.
Hmm. Right. It adds those external scholarships can add some motivation.
Hmm.
And what I found is the more that they apply for external scholarships, it can get easier because it's
Hmm.
often you're reusing an essay or it's often some of the same information that some of these external scholarships are looking for.
Yeah. And
Um,
I always think the best place to look for those scholarships is close to home. You can go to
Local.
the College Board website, you can go to FastWeb, and there's gazillions of scholarships out there.
Right.
Those all have gazillions of applicants. Your high school's College and Career Center will have ones that are just for students at your school, just for students in your community. Sometimes it's just for some program within your school. I mean, our high school had a scholarship for the tennis team. There's like 12
Hmm.
people on the tennis team.
Yeah.
And one of them gets it every
I was gonna
year.
say, and yeah, yeah, and not all of them are graduating that year. So yeah, no, absolutely. Um, so who do you think parents or caregivers should be the ones leading this conversation, or do you think it's better if the student actually, sets up like a date, right? Like, hey, mom and dad, or mom, dad, etc. Like Saturday morning, can we go out for pancakes? And I want to ask you about, my finances for college. What do you think? Who should be kind of leading the conversation?
I think parents need to be the adults in the room. I don't think we should expect our kids to do that. Now, knowing that not every student's family situation works that way.
Right.
If you are a rising senior, or by the time, a current high school senior, and your parents haven't talked to you about money, now's a great time to bring it up with them. Because the problem is, talking about money with your kids is probably about as awkward as talking about sex with your kids. Um, but it's still a really important conversation for you to have with them.
Yeah, yeah, without a doubt. And when, like, is there any time that's too early?
I think you just need to be age appropriate when you have conversations about college. Kindergartners, elementary school kids do not need to know about student loans, but what's really
Mhm.
helpful for them to know is that college was something that made your life better, or that college is something that you aspire for them to get. And that can
Mhm.
be anything from, when my kids were little, we used to go down to the Bay Area, and we would stay with one of my college friends. And I always made a point of saying, Kelly and I met in college and we're friends, we've been friends all this time. And it was so great to, have an environment where we made all these great friends and did all these interesting things together, so that we stuck together. Or I didn't know how thunderstorms worked until I took a meteorology class. You can take your kids to experiences at your local college. There's so much going on
Mhm.
college campuses. It's really easy to find something interesting to take them to, whether it's a sports event. A lot of them have days that kids can come and have experiences on campus, things like that. I do think by the time they're in high school, that's a good time to start talking about what your actual budget looks like. Sort of a transitional conversation when they're in middle school is, hey, we want you to know it's important to us that you can go to college, and we've been saving diligently for that. That doesn't mean that your options are going to be unlimited, but it does mean that you're going to have some support from us.
Right.
Um,
Right.
but when they get to high school, it's a really good time to look hard and serious at your budget because the years left to accumulate money for college are limited. Your family's situation probably is unlikely to change terribly dramatically in that time frame. And so that's really a good a good time to start um, to to start having those conversations about,
Yeah.
we're confident that we can get you through our in-state schools, or hey, let's make sure we learn about all the different pathways to a degree here because there are so many great ways to get a college degree. My son has a friend who got a 4-year degree for free. So she did 2 years of free community college, and then she was working for Starbucks, and Starbucks had a tuition partnership program with
Yep.
Arizona State. And
Arizona
so she
State.
finished her degree at
Absolutely.
Arizona State. She didn't have a lot of financial support from her family, and she was pursuing a career path that you know, wasn't going to make her rich. Um, and so that was a great choice for her. And she's
Yeah.
a debt-free college graduate out in the world, making a living. And because she's not making student loan payments, this career that doesn't pay a ton still, affords her a really nice lifestyle.
Right, right. It's really interesting that you highlighted that because so in Durango, Colorado, I actually met with the store manager of the Starbucks to talk about that tuition program. And she had recently moved from Denver. And it was really interesting. What she told me was at her store up in Denver, she had several employees that utilized the tuition benefit program
Mhm.
through Starbucks and ASU. But the store in Durango, like nobody was using it and she couldn't
Yeah,
figure it out. She just couldn't get anybody like to even talk about it.
yeah.
So it was really interesting. So thanks for highlighting that. I,
Yeah.
I think
And
that,
there are a lot of employers that offer programs like that. They're generally there to an online program,
mhm,
but her diploma looks the same as everyone else's.
yeah. Well, and I'll just really quick, a
And it's got the
personal
most important
story.
name on it, hers.
Yeah, yeah, right. I mean, a really quick personal story because in your book, you talk about ways that students can offset costs, like becoming a resident assistant or working in the dining hall to get, lower food costs. So my wife went to grad school in 2023 and at the University of Colorado, and I got a job at the University of Colorado. And as an employee, she got 12 credits a year um, as a benefit. And so we saved thousands of dollars and basically we were able to cover her grad school with no debt. And a major part of it was because basically we had like 24 credits covered. So,
Yeah, and there's so many great ways out there to get through college.
yeah,
I think,
yeah,
another one that I always point out to parents is this. If your student is doing advanced classes in high school with the intention that they can get a degree in less than 4 years, that needs to be one of your search criteria for colleges
mhm,
because not all colleges are going to give you credit for those courses.
yeah. Yeah, very true. One of the things I tell my clients all the time is it depends. Every school has different policies. There's nothing standardized. Um, I do have another question for you because this is something I've actually heard over the years. You kind of brought in this misnomer of you'll get more financial aid if you don't save for college. And why is that not a good strategy? I've actually had people say that to me, like, we're not going to save because you get penalized due to the FAFSA calculations and things like that. But why is that not an ideal strategy?
Yeah. So it is true that you include the assets that you own outside of your retirement accounts and outside of your personal residence on the FAFSA, and that they count towards your ability to pay. However, they count at 5.64% of their value, which is to say that every $10,000 of savings that you have will reduce your financial aid eligibility by $564. That also means that it expands your college choices by $9,446,
Mm,
that $10,000 of savings. And you can multiply that a lot. The other thing that one of the nice changes that came out of the recent changes to the FAFSA, the simplification, is when you save in a 529, if you have multiple children, you only include each child's 529 on their own FAFSA. So if you have three kids and you're dividing $6,000 and you put 2,000 into each 529, then only $2,000 of that money counts as an asset that you can use to pay for college. But assets have such a negligible impact on your college cost, that not saving is really just shooting yourself in the foot. If you don't believe me, there's a tool online called the Student Aid Estimator. And this is the Department of Education's tool that you punch your numbers in and it calculates your student aid index, which is the amount they say you can pay for college. You can go in there and punch in just your income with no assets. And then I would suggest that you put your income plus $100,000 of assets, and you can see what the difference that makes in your projected student aid index, just to see that it's it's not worth not having those choices.
yeah,
I've never
yeah,
met a parent
absolutely.
of an 18-year-old who regretted saving.
Right, right. Well, and just a couple before we wrap up here. So if I'm a parent, I'm listening to this, and I have a child who's a freshman or a sophomore in high school, and what I hear on this like motivates me, like, oh yeah, we need, let's get started. What are three things that you would tell them to do like this week? Like what's their launching point?
Yeah. So, three things you can do. One is look up the cost of your in-state schools and what they give scholarships for. Because you can plan your child's 4 years of high school so that they'll be eligible for scholarships. And now you know what college is going to cost them. Um, the second thing is do the student aid estimator. It's online at studentaid.gov. That'll tell you, are you likely to be eligible for need-based aid, or should you be focused on colleges that offer merit scholarships? If your student aid index is above the cost of college, you're not eligible for need-based aid. If it's lower than the
Right.
cost of college, you are. Most people fall somewhere in between. If you think of public schools, maybe $30,000 a year, private schools, $100,000 a year, someone with a student aid index of 50,000 is going to be eligible some places um, and not others.
Not
So
others.
start doing that. And the other thing is have a conversation with your kid, about college, about your expectations, about the support that you want to give them. Um, and and I would say too, one of the things that surprised me as a parent, um, I had one kid who was like a D1 mathlete, and the other who was a very normal kid who heard a lot, oh, you're not going to get into a good college because you're. Um, we we were on a family vacation. We took a wrong turn, ended up on fraternity row at the University of Arizona on football game day.
Oh wow. All right.
And I want to say it was like sophomore year of high school. And his eyes opened wide. He's like, that's not what I expected college to be. From all the things that he had internalized a lot of kind of negative stuff about college, like that he wasn't good enough and that it was this, sorting hat that he was going to be unhappy about the outcomes with. All of a sudden he's like, this kind of looks interesting to me. So make sure that your kids understand that college is something that you want to enrich their lives. You want them to have, it's an opportunity for great experiences. It's an opportunity for great learning. It's an opportunity to help them develop the potential that you've already helped develop in them, and develop it to its fullest so that they can, launch and be out there in the world. But it's not a scary place. It's not something to be intimidated about. It's something that has the potential to be some of the best 4 years of their lives.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Well, thanks. Well, I do just want to again, thanks for everybody who's tuned into this. If you're interested in reaching out to Ann, you can always go to her website, which is thecollegefinanciallady.com. Please check out her book, How to Pay for College. And I always ask my guests a closing question, which is, what is one piece of advice you received from a mentor, a friend, or a colleague that you'd like to share with others?
I also remember early in my career, this guy who was a little bit of a mentor to me. I was totally stymied with some decision, and he said, do something even if it's wrong.
Mm,
And I was like, what do you mean? But what if it's wrong? He goes, do it and you can make it right.
yeah, yeah. Do it, right? Do something, and because you'll never know until you take that action. So that's
Mhm.
awesome. Well, thanks so much. Well, thank you to Ann. Really appreciate our conversation today. And thanks to all of you for joining us here on College Bound Success, College to Career. If you found today's episode helpful, please be sure to follow, rate, and share it with someone who's navigating their own college journey. For more tips, tools, and support, you can visit my website at mastalskicoaching.com or follow me on LinkedIn. And again, if you'd like to know more about financial aid and help, please, you can reach out to Ann and her resources. So until next time, stay curious, stay confident, and stay boundless. Thanks, everybody.